evidently, I don't know if this comes out of TikTok. I can't keep up with where things go viral these days, but everybody is talking about whether or not they are impressed by the Roman Empire. And evidently, a lot of guys spend a lot of time thinking about the Roman Empire. This is what's being discussed on social media. So our head of social media said, hey, Clay, can you talk on the Friday show about how often you think about the Roman Empire? I actually do. I'm a history nerd. I think about all different sorts of aspects of history on a regular basis, but I think about the Roman Empire all the time, even more so because I just got back from Rome in March. And why am I thinking about the Roman Empire? I came back and I asked an interesting question. After I went around Rome and after I saw the Pantheon and after I saw so many of the beautiful Colosseum, majestic ruins of ancient Rome, and so many of the cathedrals all throughout Italy that were built during the Roman Empire, many of them. And I said, and I still think this is true, how many things have been built in my life that hundreds of years from now, people would be willing to go and stand in front of and be impressed by? And I think it's such an interesting question. Now, there's movies that have been made. Maybe you can say hundreds of years from now, people are going to watch Star Wars. Maybe they're still going to watch the Marvel movies. I don't know. Seems unlikely to me, but maybe they will. But when you walk into so many of these parts of Rome, like the Pantheon's a great example, there's a permanence to it and a significance to it that much of that does not exist in the United States in particular. The Pantheon in particular, when I walked in, these gigantic doors, you look at the hole in the ceiling, it's 2,000 years old. 2,000 years old. And when I was standing in the Pantheon, thing built at the apex of the Roman Empire that's still in impeccable shape today, still go visit it, encourage you to do so. I couldn't stop thinking to myself, if Benjamin Franklin or George Washington or Thomas Jefferson happened to walk into the Pantheon, that Pantheon was 17 or 1800 years old when they walked in there. Think about how crazy that is. The Pantheon is so old that when George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin walked in, these icons, the founding fathers of our own country, the Pantheon was 17 or 1800 years old. We think of the United States as this incredibly long-lasting, permanent place, but the things that are old here aren't actually old at all. A house that's 200 years old is commonplace in much of the rest of the world, certainly in Europe and certainly in Italy and as a part of the Roman Empire. So, to me, what it represents is permanence in an impermanent world and the desire to create dynasties. And I think men in particular are thinking oftentimes in our heads about what's going to come after us. Like, I've got 3 boys. I spend a huge part of my day thinking about, hey, how do I help those 3 boys to become the best versions of themselves so that then they can grow up and be dads and they can have kids, boys, girls, and they can have a bunch of those kids that hopefully make the world a better place. And that we can continue to advance as a society. And I think a lot of people look back at ancient Rome, at this apex civilization that dominated the world and indeed gave much of the framework for our country to exist as it does today, right? If you go back and study ancient Greece and ancient Rome, that is the foundation of much of our republic, much of our democratic processes. But what it shows you is the transitory nature of permanence and how something that is the greatest that has ever been created in the history of the world can decline. And I think there is just something innately human about the stories, the legacies, and the just narrative arc of Rome that is compelling. And then I think there's other things about it that people like. I think men like that you had gladiators. I've talked a lot in my career about football. Running onto a football field is as close to the modern gladiatorial experience as exists, I think, in modern American life, right? Football is our version of gladiatorial combat. And I know that people can say, well, what about UFC? What about boxing? I actually think football is more commonplace because basically we've built all of these stadiums that are replicas of the original Coliseum. And the way that you run out into those ramparts with everybody able to look down upon you, and the passion, the vim, the vigor, the vitality that is there. So I think about history all the time. I think about ancient Rome. I think about our country, which history is very short. But I think history is important, and contemplating the longer arc of history is important because what it teaches you is to be humble. Because I'm a history major. Anybody who studies history understands that what the right or wrong side of history is may not be known for hundreds of years. We still argue over decisions that Civil War generals made. We still argue over invasion decisions that were made in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Were they the right decision, the wrong decision? And so it teaches you to be humble, and also teaches you that, I really do believe this, over time, that humanity's aspirations are phenomenal and humanity's achievements continue to grow. But I think there's something about standing in many of those old architectural relics and thinking about what it would have been like to spend basically your whole life trying to make one corner of a cathedral beautiful, and to have made it so beautiful that 1,000 years later, thousands of years later, hundreds of years later, people would come and stand jaws dropping at the majesty of your work. And again, the thing I would just say from an art perspective is how much that has been created in my life is going to still matter hundreds of years from now in terms of a physical edifice. That's what I think about when I'm in ancient Greece or ancient Rome.